Hey, hello, and welcome to the Content Advantage. My name is Scott Abel. I'll be the host for today's show. And with me is my guest today, Sarah Ann Johnson. Hi, Sarah.
Hey, Scott. How are you today?
Excellent. I'm glad you can hear me. I can hear you. You're coming in loud and clear,
Yay.
and I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. I'm having a good day. So far, so good.
Excellent. Well, we're here today to talk about content first design, as you know, and I'll jump back to you in just a second, but let me tell the audience a few things about this show. First of all, audience members, we can't see or hear you. We don't have access to your camera nor your microphone, so you don't have to worry about that at all. At any time, if you feel compelled, you'd like to ask a question of Sarah or myself, you can do so by clicking the Ask a Question button located underneath your webinar viewing panel. Doing so opens a little text window into which you can text your question. Just keep in mind it's a one-way channel, so you're only texting to us. We can't text and answer back to you. Also, there's additional content available. During the show, you can access the attachments button located underneath your webinar viewing panel to open a document repository where you can find things like troubleshooting information about the BrightTalk platform, contact information for today's presenter, and information about the show, the topics of the show, and today's sponsor, Zoom In Software. Also, during the show, sometimes we ask some polls, but it turns out today I don't think we're going to do any unless we do one on the fly, and if so, we'll let you know. Also, at the end of the show, we'd like you to give us some feedback and tell us what you thought of the quality of the information provided on today's show using our 1 through 5-star rating system, with 5 stars being the highest rating possible. All right, without further ado, we're going to jump back here and talk to Sarah, have a little interview. Sarah, let's start with the obvious question here. First, who are you and what do you do for a living? Tell our audience a little bit about that and your connection to this topic.
Sure. I'm associate manager of content strategy at CVS. I've been in content strategy since it was a thing, since I first read Christina Halverson's book and realized that content strategy is what I was actually doing. And awesome. Once she named it, I was able to hone in and identify. And I think we all sort of democratized the craft and have brought it forward to be quite an exceptional practice in the world. And I'm thrilled to be a part of that. I look forward to continuing to evolve and be part of this community.
And what do you mean when you say content first design? Could you talk just briefly about what that means?
Sure. I think when we get started in the old days doing websites, it was coding and then pictures and then words. And words was sort of an afterthought, something you plop into a beautiful design. Like, the designers would come up with what they were doing and go over and say, oh, we need some words here. Can you say this? And the more that time has gone by and we've learned about how people operate in an online experience, we've learned that what we're doing really is creating a conversation with a user. And in order to have a meaningful conversation with a user, words come first. We don't talk in pictures. We used to, yeah. But we really need to speak in words. And the sooner we get content to the table, the more meaningful of an exchange, the more human an exchange, a digital experience can be. And that's sort of where I'm going with content first design, is to create a meaningful conversation with a user.
That makes a lot of sense, but it also seems like, we talk about content a lot here, so a lot of the people watching the show will probably have a pretty good idea what you were going for with content first design. But what about when you're talking to people who might be confused, like, why do we need to have this? How do you avoid the confusion and explain what content first design is?
Content first design means evaluating a user experience from a content perspective early on in the process. So doing user research around content, doing planning and pre-vision work around content. It doesn't mean not engaging UX. It means working out your content experience so that you have a strong content strategy rationale going into your work with UX design and going into your work with the broader team. You want to have a strong voice for content. You want to have a strong perspective. You don't want to be responding or reacting to designs that already exist. You want to come in with a presence and a point of view.
That makes a lot of sense. I think you did a good job there. How did you come to write a book about this, though? I mean, doing it in your own practice is one thing, and then fighting
Right.
everybody else is a totally different thing.
Yeah, so the book is in progress. The book came, I teach a course on this at Bentley University in the user experience design program. And when I was asked to teach the course, I didn't want to take over the other person's slides. I wanted to kind of take the opportunity to reflect on how I thought about content strategy. The course was called Content Strategy. So I reflected on how I thought one should approach it and put together a course. And the course became what's in this talk and sort of the backbone of the book.
Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah,
Then let's start with, tell us about those 8 steps. Where can we start to kind of learn about that?
sure. I happen to have some slides here.
Awesome.
The first step is conducting a content inventory. And we can talk about that a little bit. Conducting a content inventory is simply like getting your arms around the scope of what you're dealing with. So it's creating a list of all the content on the website and where it lives. And one of the reasons we do this up front, no matter how small, if you're redoing a little part of a website or a whole website project, this helps you scope and budget the project. It can help keep people's focused on what they're doing and what they're not doing. It helps you understand where content lives, possibly where it came from, how old it is, the quality of the content. And it can help you avoid things like redundancies, widows, irrelevant and outdated content. And it's also, because it's an organized layout of all the content that you have, it provides a reference document.
Yeah,
So I
that's
find it an invaluable tool. I mean, there are books written just on taking inventories and audits.
yes. In fact, the Content Wrangler
Yeah,
publishes one by Paula Land. In
exactly.
fact, if audience members go to xmlpress.com, you can look up content inventory or content audit, and you will find Paula's book. This is a critical step that I think a lot of folks might try to skirt around,
Yes.
assuming that they already know. Is that a thing in your world? I mean, for me as an observer on the outside, I see it all the time, and that's one of the things that kind of takes me back. When there is a content problem, I ask, well, did you start with an inventory? And often the answer is no. Have you seen the same thing?
Absolutely, and I think that people think it's gonna cost more money in time to do an inventory, and at the end of the day, it saves money and time because it really helps understand what we're dealing with, what exists currently, and if you know what you currently have, it can help you determine where you're going. It's like looking at a map, you need a starting point before you know your destination.
Right.
So I think it's invaluable.
When you use this step in your content strategy work, is it possible that you discover things that you didn't intend to discover along the way while
Oh,
inventory?
I think that's sort of the point. Yeah, I think understanding like redundancies, old content that doesn't live up to style guides, which are always evolving. I think it's to be expected to find the unexpected. Definitely. I
Excellent.
mean,
All
that's
right. Well,
yeah, yeah.
we'll keep,
That's my experience.
taking an inventory, especially if you were not a content person, if you were a numbers person, for example, let's say an inventory control specialist in a store, you do it because you're trying to accumulate all that information. But then there's a next step that you do with that, and I think that's step 2 in your process.
It is step two. Let me get us there.
Awesome.
Step two is conducting a content audit. And an audit is a great thing, and you use the inventory as sort of the basis for the audit because now we know what all the content is. So we take the inventory document, we go through the site and analyze the content. We want to know, evaluate the various attributes such as the findability of the content, the readability, how relevant it is it redundant, and sort of the overall quality of the content. You might have fields on there, you decide what you're evaluating for. So you could have fields on there like meets brand and style guidelines, meets SEO standards, meets accessibility standards. So it's an opportunity to really focus in on your concerns about any of the content you're evaluating. And there are 3 types of audits that are typical in this setting. One of them is a quantitative inventory, which is what we talked about in the inventory section, which like lists everything thoroughly, including page titles, URLs, metadata, traffic stats, and all the details that you would need to understand what each piece of content, how it performs. And the qualitative audit with best practices is one of the most useful tools. It looks at content from an outsider's point of view, and it measures it against best practices and user needs. So we look at is the content useful, usable, enjoyable, and persuasive? Does it meet brand standards? Is it accessible? Is it readable? You know, you choose your identifiers and evaluate the content. And this is so helpful no matter how large or small the project going into what you're doing. Especially say you're redoing a single component in a process on a website, and you have the opportunity to go in there. You know, I don't need an audit. I'm just going to be changing a few lines of text. So if you do a quick audit, you might find the opportunity to fix things on that screen that you maybe didn't know you could fix. Like say you find a line that's out of the style guide standards, and you have the opportunity to fix that while you're in there. You know, it's a great way of identifying those opportunities. And then the third type of audit is qualitative with strategic assessment. And that's when we want to know how the content aligns with business strategies based on whatever pre-vision work we did, where are gaps between what's existing and what the strategy is, and what's performing and what needs help. So I'm a big proponent of the audit. I randomly do audits on the pages I'm responsible for at CVS just for my own edification, to kind of go through and see where we're at and to understand how things work strategically, how things work performance-wise, and how things work on a qualitative basis.
Excellent. I have a question about the second kind, the qualitative audit with best practices assessment. When you're trying to answer the questions, is content useful or usable? Do you take the first pass at it with your team? Do individual content people look at it and to try to determine if they think it's useful? Because if you're not the customer, you really don't know if it's useful or not. I don't know.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
That's a good question. And one of the things we'll get into that I'm a big proponent of is guerrilla testing. And I really believe in like taking it to the streets. You know, if you don't have a budget for real usability studies, like go to people in your life, go to your family members, go to your friends, go to ask somebody outside of your team, someone preferably on another team. How useful do you find this in the experience? I think that's a great question, Scott, and there are ways to like drill down on that. But guerrilla testing, taking it to the streets, is super useful in establishing the usefulness of the content.
Exactly. Well, then once we've got an inventory, so we kind of have the lay of the land, and we have some quantitative and qualitative data about that inventory. What do we do next to make sure that the content that we're providing is strategic?
Interesting. So here, the step 3, I get into some of the pre-vision work that we can do to get our arms around what kind of the experience we're trying to create. And the next step 3 is to have a conversation mapping exercise. And conversation mapping helps you get inside a customer experience with a role-playing exercise. And it's a hypothetical conversation with an imaginary user. So you can explore what the customer is looking for and what their goal or need is, why they've come to your website, how much they understand about the topic, products, or services, and how they talk, what words they use, the tone and the voice. So, for example, you could do this on your team. We've done this on my team where one team member, say someone's working on a particular part of the site, one team member will play the customer, and the person working on that particular part of the site will play like a customer services rep. And we have an imaginary conversation, a hypothetical conversation where the team member calls customer service because they can't figure out the flow. And so the customer service rep plays the part of teasing out what the customer is looking for. So that's a way of doing it within the organization. But what's really helpful when I was working in a financial services company was to take the questions and go to someone like my mother, you know, someone who wasn't going to understand the nitty gritty details of a digital experience and the financial, the content as well. So to really tease out what someone in who with less knowledge, what their questions would be. We know what their goal is. They're trying to say move money from one account to another. What are the questions they're going to have? What are their hangups going to be? What we're going to learn from that is they don't understand financial jargon. They have good computer skills, but don't feel comfortable moving money online. We'll unearth sort of the hangups that people have in terms of a process.
And is this akin to understanding the customer's journey at the same time?
Absolutely, yeah. It's very similar. If you have a customer journey map, you can use that as a basis for the conversation to lead people through the experience. Customer journey mapping is another great pre-vision exercise.
During the conversation mapping, do you often discover, like during the inventory process, things that you wouldn't be aware of? For example, I was just curious because I'm having a healthcare procedure, and because it's in a healthcare facility, they require me to have a PCR COVID-19
Yeah,
test, which I
yeah.
will have I had to have at the pharmacy. And when I interact with the pharmacy, of course, I went to their website that directed me to their app, and I started to fill out the form. And I recognized that the categories of data that they were asking for, they were asking us to pull them from our insurance or our prescription identification card, and
Right.
that the field names that they were asking for, things like policy number, customer number, were different. The pharmacy was calling them things differently than what the actual card calls them. And so as a customer, I'm thinking, well, you know, is this ID number the same thing as customer number? So I have to call support in order to figure that out, right? um,
That's a great example of like a miss by the company. And that would be a great thing to tease out in a conversation mapping exercise. But we would have to know that such a thing exists, that there are cards out there that use different terminology. But
right.
that's something.
Or are we using our pharmacy terminology, sorry, without regard for doing that user testing that you mentioned earlier?
Exactly, exactly. That's a super interesting example.
Do you feel like that it's a tangential discovery? Like you're trying to find problems with your web content, but in effect, you might discover touch points
Oh,
where
absolutely,
just to
absolutely.
communicate with the rest of the organization. Hey, wait a minute, you guys, while you're working on your thing over there, here's something we found. How do you take those learnings and communicate them upward?
Oh, yeah. So say we do find something like that, we have a lot of communication. We call them trains across trains that handle different parts of the website experience. So we have a lot of communication across different aspects of the website. So if say we found something like that on my team that belonged over to another person's team, we would escalate it over there immediately. Like there's a lot of communication back and forth because things are so intertwined. Um, in a website as large as CVS or financial services websites that I've worked on. Um, there has to be a lot of communication across the various experiences, especially where there's overlap.
That
And
seems
there
to be
is a
a
lot of
hidden
overlap.
value. That seems to be like a hidden value of content strategy work, is that sometimes we could uncover things that might be causing challenges that impact revenue or other important factors, but they're not always seen as content, detective work.
Exactly. They are content detective work, but we're finding those wins happens, and those are little moments that we can celebrate. We're like, yay, we found this and it's going to help people, A, and B, improve revenue. But I think that, where I work now, there's a huge emphasis on helping people. And especially in a climate like COVID, helping people is our number one priority, to create an experience that's like helpful and seamless and meaningful to people.
Excellent. All right. So we've covered 3 steps. Step 1, for those audience members who just joined us, is conduct a content inventory. Step 2 is audit all that content that you've accumulated and inventoried. And step 3 is to map the conversation that the customers are having and try to figure out where the pressure points are that you can deliver the most valuable content. What's step 4?
I like that word, pressure point, but step 4 is to tell the story with content maps. And a content map is basically mapping out the customer, the part of the journey that happens in your experience that you're creating. So based on the conversation map and what you know about business goals and what you've learned through the previous exercises, how can you lead customers through an experience that helps us achieve our goals and the customer achieve their goals? So we use sort of a diagram that identifies the customer need at each step of the user journey. And I use an example of, in my class, of purchasing a remote control gate. But the idea is to just use blocks of text to diagram the customer's steps through an experience, and at each step to put what the customer needs, how we answer the need, what their next step is, and where they wind up.
That's an awful lot of work at that particular step. Do you find this to be a challenging step for people that are first introduced to this, to kind of map?
That's interesting. I give them maybe 20 minutes to do it, and they're able to, based on the evaluation we've already done, and I give them an example, like, for example, one of the examples I gave them was LL Bean to buy a woman's flannel shirt.
Okay.
And to outline what the journey is on that, like search for the shirts, view the product information, look at the picture, add it to your cart, and the checkout experience. So those would be sort of the building blocks of that experience.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, once you've got the data there and you can map it to something, then you can take action. So what is the 5th step then?
The 5th step is sketch a page with draft content. So what we've got so far is an inventory of all our content. We've evaluated the content, so we have a sense of where we're going. We have audited the content. We have done a conversation mapping exercise. We've done a content map. So we've learned a lot through the pre-vision work. So we want to sketch a page with like very simple draft content, not lorem ipsum, but sketch content based on what we've learned. And the content should be scannable with plenty of headings and subheadings. And this ties into step 6, which is to write the content. We want to put important information up front. We want to use short paragraphs and sentences, no unnecessary words, nothing decorative. Bullet points and lists to make things easily scannable and readable. And we want to be writing for our direct audience. We don't want to use any jargon, no passive tense, and no redundancies. And this has turned out to be super interesting, Scott, because based on the little pre-vision work we've done, and there's a lot of pre-vision work you can do. You can do usability studies, journey maps, empathy maps, emotional maps. There's a plethora of tools available. But based on just these few initial pre-vision steps that we did, students come up with amazing steps of sketches for pages that are light years beyond the site that we're redoing. And it's kind of incredible to see. So for example, someone took a page that looked like this, and I'll just show this very briefly, where this page, without a lot of evaluation, you can see is very difficult to find what you're looking for. And this was the sketch based on the work that we did, that one of my students came up with, where they focused on the core messaging. They made it scannable, usable. Technical information was moved to lower pages so people could drill down in, and tooltips to provide support. So just the idea of making something scannable, usable, focused on core messaging, they came up with this rather than this, which I
Wow,
thought was pretty
significant
amazing.
difference.
Yeah. And that's just a sketch. This is before we've even brought UX in with their amazingness.
Right. And the
So
sketch encompasses lots of other things, right? Like the metadata surrounding all the different messaging.
absolutely, and we haven't even talked to them about that. And once I started seeing that the students were getting this out of the pre-vision work, then I really got into honing, developing the ideas around this because I saw it as so valuable. And the students have been amazing. They've really embraced the work and gone on. One of my students works with me now at CVS. He's on my team, which is it's great. It's great to see. It's great to see people thriving.
Yeah, that's great. And I really like this example of sketching out a page because I think it also puts a little bit of the experience into the content creator's head, right? Because now you have actionable things you can make changes to and see how
Yeah,
that would impact the experience.
exactly.
So those 5 steps are critical. And I think those are really good. And I realize that we haven't really talked about, nobody's written any content really yet, except for these examples, right? We have to have
Right.
some examples to play around with where we have some fictional content or some practice content, if you will. What do we do next? What's step 6?
Step 6 is to write the actual content, and step 5 and 6 I sort of combine together in this presentation and in my class where they do the sketch and they put in early draft content. So they put make things very scannable, they stick to the story, they keep it readable, they put the I call it the most bang for your buck content up front.
Mm-hmm.
And keep it short, no redundancies. And the writing of content is a large science in and of itself, and that's sort of a separate course. But I do cover certain aspects of enough aspects of content writing to get people started. And this course is more about the evaluation of the content. But people do a remarkable job, and there are wonderful books written about UX writing. And I'm developing a course about that now as well. So I think they did a remarkable job with just sort of like directional instruction about writing content.
Excellent. And that's 6 steps out of the 8. What
Yep.
happens around step 7 once you've gotten the design drafted, kind of where you think things might go, and you've got the messaging solid for now? Test and iterate. Iterate.
Yeah. So number 7, I have the class test the content. I have the team switch up. And now they have the content map and sketch. They can do some user research or usability studies, both formally and informally. Before they take their sketches out to the real world, they run them by people they work with or folks at home. So they create a list of scenarios for users that will help illuminate pain points. And if the user doesn't understand, then they sort of drill down into how they would explain it. And this can reveal language choices, knowledge and reading levels, and tone. So I have them in the course, we're limited, so we do it with each other. And so people do usability studies and they share them and then they iterate on the content and they evolve their designs. And this is useful, and it might not happen in a real world experience. It might. We do a lot of testing and iterating on content in the places that I've worked. And what's interesting in the class is that they're actually doing it with the designs as well, because we've taken it that far. And it's so cool to see people embracing the process. They get really excited by content strategy because they have a hands-on experience. I'm not talking to a list of slides for 2 days. They really create something at the end, and many of them use it for their portfolio. And by going through this process, they just learn a lot that they're able to carry into the real world, it's just wonderful to see. It's very rewarding as a practitioner and an instructor.
Lots of people say, hey, if you don't have budget, you can do an informal test, which I understand why you want to do that. What is the role of formal testing, and how does that work in a company that actually can't rely or prefers not to rely on the informal testing? What does the formal testing look like, and how is it different than informal testing?
Formal testing is great. It's wonderful because we have professional user researchers and they can set up all kinds of things. They can have people come in and run through scenarios. They can run tests on usertesting.com. They can collect data from various websites. There's a tremendous amount of research available to them that we wouldn't have in a smaller company. And that's a great resource of working for a large enterprise.
And where does the input come from? Out what output from the usability formal testing becomes input into your strategy, I guess?
Oh, good question. So what they really uncover are pain points in the process, language people didn't understand, places where it fell short in sort of explaining how to do the first thing to get to the second thing. Hopefully, it would uncover your situation with the language being out of sync on your pharmacy card. But uh, mostly it's a variety of pain points in the process that we work to resolve.
And when you're doing informal testing, what are there any like bias problems that might creep in? Is that one reason why we
Oh,
might?
absolutely, absolutely, and that's why you wanna run it by, a host of people, um, and people that are not on your team, that have a different point of view, that are more, um, not ignorant, but maybe objective, that aren't involved in the process, that aren't familiar with it already.
Yeah, I was going to say if you had skin in the game or you were accustomed to seeing content presented a certain way, you might begin to think that's just the right way to do it. Um,
Exactly,
we've always
exactly.
done it that way here, I guess, is the
That that's the paradigm we're trying to break.
excellent. Well, there's 7 steps right now. So the eighth step, what is your eighth step in content first design?
Let's see. This is one of the most important steps is to get sign off from stakeholders such as product, business, legal, and marketing. And nothing goes out the door without everybody signing off. So product needs to assure that it meets the business goals. Legal needs to assure that it's compliant. And marketing needs to make sure that it's in sync with any messaging that they're putting out. And these partners are great, and one of the cool things is that the more you work with them, the more you learn what they need and the smoother getting sign off goes, because you learn to write content that's legally compliant. You learn to write content that meets business goals. You have build a relationship with marketing so you understand the messaging they're putting out. um, and I'd say if there was a step 9, it would be advocating for content strategy in the organization.
Yeah, and I was going to say it seems like some of the exercises that we went through these 8 steps would yield some interesting and potentially valuable data that a post sign off wrap up could provide, right? Like when you're going around advocating for a content strategy, maybe it would help to say, even during the initial efforts of a content strategy product, we were able to find 5 different places that could be quickly improved. That would, might not have been your responsibility, by the way. It might have been another team or somebody else and it just went
Mhm.
unnoticed, right? Because nobody made the
Right.
connections. And I don't expect leaders to have those connections automatically. They don't just know,
Absolutely
oh,
not.
that's what content strategists do.
Yeah, yeah, they don't. And to escalate those findings and those wins really advocates for content strategy and really proves the value of the practice in the organization. And where I work, we don't have to prove it. It's we've proven it. But I think there's a huge need for advocating for content strategy in many, many organizations because it's to some people it's new and that always surprises me because to me it's like, old hat, like it's so obvious. But it's not obvious to everybody. And there are people who really need to work hard to advocate for content strategy. And using these steps, I think, can give a real backbone to your findings and substantiate your findings and prove to people the value of content strategy.
I think the value is difficult for people who think that content people are like artists, right? Like, oh, their brain, they think about some stuff, then they use a keyboard and they write some stuff, and then they're good
Right.
at that, and that's what they do. That's their special skill. And it's like, no, actually, that I don't know anything about automobile tires, but I could work at an automobile company and have to learn about that, right? I'll have to do my research in order to become
Right.
accustomed to talking in tire vernacular, if you will. But that's not a thing that doesn't happen automatically. It doesn't happen automatically. You need research, and I think your message is that you start with research and data to make your decisions. So you're trying to make evidence-based decisions about content.
Absolutely. Evidence-based decisions. You want to have a substantiated content strategy rationale so that you go in knowing the problem you need to solve. You've got the data because you've done the research, and you've got samples of how you could solve the problem based on that research. And so you're going into a project from a strong point of view. So it could evolve once you start working with product and UX design and all the other players, but however it evolves, it's going to be based on a lot of knowledge that you have. You're
It's
not
often,
coming into it cluelessly. Yeah.
yeah, it's often said that you could do this content strategy work without any tools, which some of this that is true. We could definitely we'd need our computers or some kind of recording devices, obviously, to keep track of the data and to publish and all that. But I wonder if when you're teaching students or if you're working in these organizations that you've worked for, having the content strategy and then mapping your content needs and goals to the tools that you're going to need seems like something that we sometimes skip over. We say, oh, you can do all this work, and then if you're using an Etch a Sketch and some duct tape to make a website, just at least it'll be a better website. But how practical is that in the real world? Don't we need the tools that can deliver up that slice of content that's been mapped to a specific portion of the journey at the right time in the right language? It seems to me like tools come second. Yes, we need to know about our content, but if you don't have the right delivery, how will the experience even possibly remotely be good?
I think you need the tools. I think, in my experience, coming at it cold, you can't understand the customer. I mean, we're here. The whole point is to be there for the customer, to be there for the user, and we need to know something about them. We need to know where they're coming from in some capacity in order to write like inclusive, meaningful content.
Right.
So I don't know how people do that without prevision work. I don't unless yeah, I'm not sure how to answer that, Scott.
Yeah, I was going to say it's challenging. I hear
Yeah,
people say it, and I know what they're trying to say. They're trying to say, don't go buy a tool and think it magically makes everything work, and that some companies are successful with a smaller toolkit or a less expensive or less capable toolkit. But it seems to me once you're really concerned about managing the minutia of somebody's journey, you need
yeah,
tools that are industrial strength enough to be able to do that. Or you're just going to write a long piece of content that says, if you do this, then do that. If you do that, do this. When I went to
yeah.
the drive-through to get my test for the COVID, for example, um, I noticed immediately that the content designers had not fashioned this content to be about me being sick. So it wasn't like,
Mm,
oh, you're getting tested because you're sick. It basically said like, oh, there's a lot of reasons why you might need to get a test. And, if you're sick, don't do these things. Don't go running in the store. Like,
right,
we
right.
need those germs in there, that kind of thing. Stay in your car. But if you're traveling, then you're going to need documentation of your test results if you are required to have a test somewhere else. And so they knew my journey might have different facets that wouldn't be the same as the next person. And based on
Interesting.
my criteria, the content changed to reflect my situation. I think that's the part of the tooling that a lot of just simple web content management systems don't have that functionality baked into them. And so we need some kind of delivery platform that can do that. And I would imagine working for a company like CVS Health, that was a big, part of the project, was to try to figure out how could we have tools that we could use over time and we could grow and adapt and make better. How
Yeah.
important is it to revisit your content once you've already, let's say made it through your first project? Because it doesn't end, right? It's a
No, it's
constant thing.
constant iterative experience. And constantly being evaluated and upgraded and made more useful for the user. And tools are evaluated, and experiences are redesigned and rejiggered to work more for the customer and to cover a variety of conditions.
When you try to sell the value either to your students, because when you're communicating to them, in effect you're trying to convince them that the thing you're trying to teach them is worthy of their energy to,
Yeah,
to
yeah.
do, what are the potential benefits that you tell people about using a content first design process as opposed to just winging it?
Oh my goodness, the benefits are huge. It cuts down on overall development time. It will improve the metrics and the usability of the experience. It will make their lives easier in the long run. It's much more gratifying for sure to know where you're coming from than to just be throwing darts at a wall. And mostly what's rewarding is you're creating something that's actually useful for the person on the other end of the experience. But for a company perspective, it increases the usability of the experience, the metrics that we get.
Do you, do you see any drawbacks? Like, those are all good things, but we expect there to be good things, right? We're telling people how
Oh
to
yeah, yeah, yeah.
potentially do something, so we're going to, of course, tell them the good things. But what are some of the warnings or the potential pitfalls?
I don't know about pitfalls. You know, I don't know if this is a drawback, but it does take time up front that needs to be scoped for. And it does take, like you said, people putting energy into it and thought and consideration. And people have to learn how to do it. Um, those are some of the things that we need to get into place. And some of the drawbacks are actually getting people to implement the process. Like we've got there are always old school UX designers who don't want to change how they work. They don't want to bring content in early. They want to do their thing, then hand it off to content. And there's always resistance with something new. And how do you combat the resistance? And one of the ways we combat it is showing the results and say, let us come in early and you'll see the difference in the designs. You'll see that it makes your life easier. You'll see that it's a better user experience.
Excellent. I appreciate that. For the viewers who want to learn more, who do you go to? Are there any resources or people or companies that you rely on to kind of communicate and learn new things about content first design and related disciplines?
There really isn't a ton out there. There are a lot of books just about content strategy that I study up on, and I'm always learning about new tools like empathy mapping and emotional mapping. I try and keep up to date on research methods. So I read a lot about inventories and audits. So I study a lot of my steps, and I'm adding to them and taking away from them. So I'm constantly trying to learn to evolve the process. I think anyone in the field should become a lifelong learner and read whatever you can about content. Um, I don't know if I can name some books, but there are so
Sure.
many wonderful books. Well, the XML Press books are great. Tori's book on UX writing, strategic UX writing. Michael Metz and Andy Welfie, Writing is Designing, are wonderful examples of some ways to put content first. Um, they're different, but they get at the same principles.
Excellent. Let's take some questions from the audience here. So I've got a
Sure.
couple. Let's see. One of them is you were going to talk about guerrilla testing versus real usability testing. Could you do that?
Sure. Guerrilla testing is like I call taking it to the streets, like using the people around you at work and in your life who you can run quick down and dirty tests with. Whereas real usability testing is done by the user research team within an organization. And it's more formal. Some of it requires bringing people in and running scenarios, focus groups, if you will, and doing polls, gathering data. So the difference is, you running something casual, not casual, informal on your own versus formal enterprise user research group doing it.
Thank
And
you
the
for that.
benefit of doing the guerrilla testing is you can do it anytime, anywhere. You don't have to get budget, you don't have to scope it, and you can get really good results really quickly.
Are there any challenges with guerrilla testing, working in
Sure.
that you want to warn people about?
Sure, you want to find people with a variety of perspectives. You don't want to find people that are biased or that are going to look at things like, oh, like Scott mentioned earlier, that's how we do it, that's fine. You want people from outside the typical perspective that you have inside your team.
One of our viewers says that they would imagine that their boss would poo-poo the idea of steps 1 through 4 in the detailed way that they imagine that you would want them to do this, as
Right,
opposed
right.
to like, we know we have 3 websites. That's how many we have. Oh, look, we counted them. There's 3. Fix them. Right. How do you? I think this person wants to know, how do you explain the value of steps 1 through 4 to a leader to get them to give you the time and the resources that you need to fulfill the promise that this approach has?
That's a great question. And that's sort of what I talk about when I'm talking about advocating for content first design. I think the proof is in the pudding. I think that if you're able to do it in just once and demonstrate the value through gathering metrics, get data, show the data on an experience as it is, and show the data when you do the background, and find the language to talk about it. You're creating a conversation with a user. How can you create a meaningful conversation that gets through to them and helps them get through an experience and push the like checkout button if you don't understand who they are? And through each step of those processes, share what you're learning about the customer. Share that it's a way of doing research without engaging user research. And, at the end of the day, it's about the data.
What's the biggest aha moment you've had trying to write this book? Did you learn something and go, oh, of course?
There are a bunch of aha moments. One of them is that I'm going to add more prevision work, just and give people sort of leadership around what's appropriate for their project. I had an aha moment when I was thinking about the book, because I was like, content first design, sure, blah, blah, Sarah Johnson. What would make it more useful to the huge content community we've got, which is enormous worldwide? So I thought, no one wants to hear from just me. Who am I? I'm going to make it a crowdsourced guide. So what I'm doing with the book is I'm saying what I think, but then I'm bringing in different points of view from other leaders in the field, to provide sort of to answer some of these questions that people have, to answer the things that I haven't thought of, to poke holes in my argument. And the idea is to teach people to think for themselves what's going to work for them in their organization. Here's how I approach it. Here's how some other people approach it. How might you approach it? And to encourage people to be lifelong learners, to encourage people to explore the field and question the status quo.
Interesting. I know that you also care about lots of other topics, not just content first design. And one of the things that you and I have in common is I'm working on a research project on trying to establish the landscape of inclusive language.
Yes.
How has inclusive language played a role in some of the decisions that you're starting to make now about the content that you design for your customers?
We have an extensive content style guide around inclusivity. So we have specific language that we use and that we don't use. And that's something that's an organization by organization thing. We have language that we use for a Spanish speaking audience. We have language that we use for people of different abilities, neurodiversity. And those those sorts of decisions happen at like a content strategy wide level, and they're so important. They're where websites are speaking to such a broad audience, and enterprises that I've worked for, financial organizations and CVS, they're out there for everybody, not just a sector of the population, but for the entire population. And it's critical to think of language that speaks to that entire population. And sensitivity to that is something we work to develop daily.
One of our viewers wants to know, shouldn't the amount of diligence that we're putting into creating these rules for our content and these pathways to creating them, these great experiences, shouldn't they also be evidence-based style guide decisions instead of my boss thinks it's important to make that word bold, so we do it?
Oh, absolutely. Style guide drives decisions like that. The boss doesn't get to decide to make something bold. Like the content style guide is there for a reason. It's constantly evaluated, it evolves, it's a living document. And that's, we're talking about evidence-based data. That's a huge piece of evidence, right? Here it is in the content style guide. This is how we talk about X in a digital environment.
Here's some advice from one of our viewers,
Oh, I
which
love
I
it.
think might be practical. Do as in you do steps 1 through 4, guerrilla style for yourself. I've done this and came into the room knowing more about the website than the client who owns the website. I don't I don't do this in a showy way, but to come across as more informed. How important is it to go to this meeting with other stakeholders and be informed?
Yeah, that's the whole point, is to be informed. I mean, I think that's right on the money. I think the idea is to be informed going in to meet with stakeholders, going in to meet with UX. The more informed we are, the more we're speaking up and advocating for content strategy. And the more of an impression, like you're talking about making an impression with clients, they're going to be, oh, this person knows where they're coming from. They understand us and what we're trying to do. So that's, yeah, it's invaluable.
Excellent. This is a question for both of us. Do either of us have any resources for us to get started about thinking about guidelines for inclusive language? This is something this person wants to incorporate into their organization's formal guidelines. My advice is there's tons of stuff out there. I'm trying to do a lay of the landscape right now, and all I can tell you is that there's so much that it's very overwhelming, and that there are good ideas in lots of places.
Yes.
There isn't really one go-to place because the intent behind inclusive language can be driven by one particular thing that a company recognizes. Like, in the United States, there's a lot of turmoil around race and other things. And so that becomes a priority for some organizations. I haven't found, I don't know about you, Sarah, I haven't found one place that has all the answers. So we're trying to build something that would help with that.
Yeah, the best place I've found is Apple has a great public inclusive design site. I looked at that, and I think that's a good example for inclusion.
Yeah, I would say also
it's not thorough, and it has the pitfalls that Scott mentioned, but it's very good.
There is we did a previous show on the IBM racial equity in design movement. So if you were just to search for that using Google, you would find that they built an entire resource center designed to help company leaders be able to communicate the value of making investments in smart word choices. And they give some other suggestions for ways to make people feel included that aren't just about words. It is that particular resource is racial in its focus, but it points out that there are many, many, many reasons that you would want to use better, more inclusive, more accurate language. And they don't all have to do with race. They may have to do with,
right.
I learned the other day, for example, from a company that makes furniture, that they're trying to better categorize beds where we sleep. Where we sleep has inclusive language problem. Why? King size.
Oh.
Queen size. They're like, all right, so how big is a king and how big is the king's bed? Why is the king's bed always bigger than the queen's bed? What
That's
happens
hilarious.
to the drag queen? Like,
That's
right?
awesome.
Like,
I
and
love
they were
it.
really serious. They were talking about
Yeah,
these words mean
wonderful.
something to people. Why are we not telling them how big the bed is? Was really
Yeah.
the question. It really wasn't about the offensiveness. Nobody said, I'm not buying that bed because you called it a king size bed. But the reality was the words are not descriptive. They're not
No,
helping people
poking
make
holes.
decisions.
Yeah, poking holes in our typical language that we make assumptions.
Yeah, I would say be on the lookout for this. We also have a webinar coming up later this year. I want to say August sometime. I'll have to double check that. If you go to brighttalk.com and search for um, metadata and inclusive language, you should learn that we're having a show with John Hordisky, who is a expert in both inclusive language and also in metadata. And he's going to make the argument that we should use metadata to help us deliver the right words to the right people in the right cultural situations, especially when you're a global company or a company that speaks to people in multiple languages. Sarah, how important is it to understand that the journey isn't the same for every single person, and that you're not really developing one solution that's perfect for everybody? You're developing a solution that's good enough for most people and helps the people who need the help the most.
This is a constantly evolving science, and we had a presentation on this yesterday. But the science of personalization is vast, and it's constantly evolving, and we're learning more every day about how to create personalized, inclusive experiences. But I don't have a one size fits all answer for that. I think it's something that we're all constantly learning, and it's while it's been around a while, it's still relatively new, based on like we don't even know what we don't know yet.
Excellent. And do you mind if anyone wanted to reach out to you with a question about how they might do this in their
No,
organization?
that would be great. I would love it.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Sarah, for joining us today. I'm going to display your contact information. Also, in the attachments section of your webinar viewing panel, you should be able to click through to Sarah's LinkedIn profile and her other contact information to get a hold of her. I'd also like to let you know that I'm extremely proud to have our sponsor today, Zoom Software, joining us. Zoom is a great tool that could do some amazing things for you. In fact, it empowers people. This is the most important thing. It empowers people to independently navigate complex product information at work as easily as they use their favorite products at home, which is super important. That means that they bring all your content together, whether it's unstructured or structured, different kinds of content for different reasons and different purposes, and put it all together into one delivery platform where your customers can come to try to find all the information that you have available for them without having to filter through thousands of things one at a time in a manual, frustrating process. They try to do the thing that Sarah just suggested, which is personalize that content experience and serve up the right information that's relevant for that person where they are in their customer journey. To learn more about Zoom Software, you can visit them on the web at zoominsoftware.com. You can also check out the attachments section where there's some content provided by Zoom. I encourage you to do so. All right, and speaking of Zoom and I will be bringing to you on June the 28th a great presentation about finding and keeping great tech writers, which will be really interesting, practical advice for hiring and retaining your staff. And then August 23rd, we're going to have Ashley Brennan come and talk to us about how to engage your staff and help everybody feel that their ideas are valuable. Both of these are both great team building and technical communication, information development, management sessions. So if you're a leader and you want some good ideas or to share your ideas with others, definitely join us for that show. And then later in the year, a super interesting group of people from ESRI, formerly ESRI. They created a podcast for technical documentation. I've been asking myself the question, why a podcast for technical documentation? And these two have the answers for you. So hopefully you'll be able to join us for that show as well. Today, you've been watching 8 Steps to Content First Design with Sarah Johnson from CVS Health as our expert. Thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it. I know that Sarah would appreciate it as well if you would give her a rating on the way out the door using our 1 through 5 star rating system. And until then, I hope that you continue to be safe, be well, and keep doing great work. We'll see you at another webinar in the future on the Content Wrangler Network. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Ensure your customers find the answers they need with Zoomin. Bring together product content from all teams and sources to deliver a unified, personalized content experience. Check us out at www.zoomandsoftware.com.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.